Okay, now I'm going to show you how to solve more complicated quadratic equations. Let's imagine for a second that we didn't have this nice perfect scenario where there's an x squared. Let's imagine that there's a number in front of it, say for example 3. And that changes everything because you cannot use this brute force. You can only use the brute force if it's x squared, right? So let's imagine that we've got a more complicated number. And we have this case here where we've got 2x squared equals 7x plus 4. Now I want everything on the zero, a zero on this side. So to do that, I have to make this 2x squared minus 7x minus 4. So you can see that these are the same things. I've taken just this stuff over here. I've subtracted it from this side, so that equals 0. And I subtract it from this side, so I get minus 7x minus 4. Okay, this one's more complicated because we've got a 2x squared there, and we can't do this simple brute force method. We're going to do something called the x factor method. Okay, so the x factor method, it's called that because you use this simple aid of putting a great big X here to the right of your calculations. And then you do a number of steps to fill numbers into each one of these spaces. And by figuring out which numbers fall into those spaces, you will figure out which numbers to plug into your equation and solve for 0. So that's what we're going to do right now. So the first number is this top number here. So in order to figure out what number to put here, we have to multiply the first number in your equation, 2, by the last number in your equation, minus 4. So 2 times minus 4 is minus 8. The next thing we need to do is put a number here. The number here is equal to the middle number in your equation, the one that has the x, and the one that's in front of the x. So that becomes 7. So we're finished half of the x. We have 2 more numbers to figure out. Now this next step is a lot like that other step from the brute force method. We have to find 2 numbers that multiply to get the top number, in this case minus 8, and add to get the bottom number, in this case minus 7. So let's start by putting out all the possibilities. What adds up? What multiplies to get minus 8? Well, we know that 2 times minus 4 is one number, minus 4, or say positive 4, rather, and minus 2. That also adds up to minus 8. Okay. Are there other ones? Sure. You can always do it by 1. So let's say minus 1 times 8 also equals minus 8. And the last one is 1 times minus 8. So out of all those 4, are there any ones that, if you were to add them together, add up to 7? Well, 2 plus minus 4, that doesn't add up to 7. 4 plus minus 2, that also doesn't add up to 7. Minus 7, rather. Minus 1 plus 8 adds up to 7. But in fact, we want minus 7. So these ones don't work. The one that does work is 1 plus minus 8, because 1 plus minus 8 adds up to the bottom number, which is minus 7. So now I'm going to take that x, I'm going to write it down here again. You'll see how it's evolving. This stays the same. Those things don't change. And now I'm going to put one number here and one number here. It doesn't matter which one you put into which square, it's all the same. But just for sake of ease, I'll put a 1 there and a minus 8 there. Okay? So that's where we're at with our numbers. Now, what I want to do to manage this little 2 up here, which I haven't forgotten about, is that I need to divide these new numbers that we just invented by that first coefficient, the number in front of the x squared. Okay? So that becomes 2, 1 over 2, and this one becomes minus 8 over 2. that actually can simplify. I think I'll do that right now. To minus 4 over 1. Okay? Always try to simplify things if you can. So now we have two new numbers that we've created, 1 over 2 and minus 4 over 1. Now, this is where the clever part comes in. The next thing that we need to do is to solve this equation, and we're going to factor it out just like we did before. Now here we actually have two numbers, a top number and a bottom number. I purposely kept these here. I said simplify, but don't simplify it too much. There should always be a top number and a bottom number, because this is going to be what we call a constant. That means the number without the x in your equation, and this is going to be the coefficient. That means the number in front of the x. So here we're going to end up with the first one is coefficient 2, that's the number in front of the x. So that's going to become 2x plus the constant, plus 1. That's one equation factored out. And the second one is going to be that one, that's the coefficient, that's 1x, which we know is the same thing as saying x, but just for simplicity right now I'll put it there. And then plus minus 4, because that's the constant, and that equals 0. So see, that's how we've gone from this to this. And if you're to multifactor these out, you're going to come up with this number. You can try it if you want. But this is how we come up with this. So now it's just the same thing as what we're doing in the brute force method. We have to assume that one of these is equal to 0. So the first time, let's assume that this is equal to 0. So that's like saying that since that doesn't exist, it's equal to 0. We can say that 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. That means we got to move that 1 over there. And that means we have to subtract minus 1 from both sides. That means that 2x is equal to minus 1. Okay, we got to simplify for x again. We got to get x totally on its own. So we have to divide both sides by 2. So then you get x divided by 2x divided by 2 is 1, or x, and minus 1 divided by 2 is minus 1/2. So that is one of the two possible values of x. So that's what we did it for this one right here. Now we're just going to do the same one for this one right here. Okay? So in this one, this is the coefficient, so that's the value of x. So x is equal to 1x, which we also call x. And then this is the constant, so that's just the number without the x, equals minus 4, equals to 0. So again, I'm solving for x, so you don't need these numbers anymore. These parentheses, you can take them off, and it becomes 1x minus 4 is equal to 0. If you add 4 to both sides, then you add up with 4 and 1x. Of course, 1x is the same thing as saying x, so x is equal to 4. So what you end up with are two possible answers. One is minus 1/2, and the other is 4. So this will work every single time. And I realize there's a lot of steps here, but if you think about it, it's totally logical, and you just need to go through this with a few different quadratic equations, and you should be able to memorize it after a while. Bye.